Welcome back, friends, to what I've chosen to call the history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll. You may call it what you like. Now, a lot of you constant listeners, repeat listeners, have heard me say this before about episodes. This one got away from me. I thought was going to be the second and final Guns N' Roses episode concerning them in the 80s and the Deadpool. Not the way it worked out. It so happens. So this will be a part 2 of 3. And there's going to be a lot of jumping around in the timeline, as there generally is with the show. But I just have to put the disclaimer out there. There just may be parts of these next 2 episodes that I intended to be one, and because segments of this were recorded more than a month or 2 ago, in fact, more than a couple of months ago, there could be points in the narrative where I refer to things, quote, later in this episode, unquote, that you're not going to hear until the next episode. Or maybe I say things like, oh, we'll hear that a little later, or I'll say things like, as we just talked about, who knows, in the the third episode that I thought was going to be part of all the same conversation. So there you go. If there's any continuity errors in there, don't let them disabuse you of any kind of enjoyment of the information and the stories that you're hearing, please. Also, I'd like to say there's no ads, there's no backers. There is a Patreon for $3 a month with 4 extra hours of rock and roll history of various sources and kinds that I have not been able to shoehorn into one of these movie/band, combinations. And it's there for you if you need it. It's up to, as of today, 8 episodes. And it will continue for the better part of a year until I get tired of doing it. But the main point of the Patreon for me is to just use up a lot of the resources I have on hand for rock and roll history that I just feel guilty about owning on the shelf when they haven't been used for the main feed yet. So if you like history for its own sake and you like hearing me read stuff to you, that avenue is there for you for a much more scholarly approach where I'm, just reading directly out of a book a lot of the time and then giving a little bit of commentary here and there. Now, in this episode of the next, you're going to hear more Guns N' Roses stories from their perspective and a few from other people in their management or in their sort of scene. And I'm going to go back to the Vince Neil and Izzy Stradlin conflict more than a couple times before we're done. You're going to hear some quotes, maybe directly out of certain people's autobiographies that you might have heard, framed in a different way from my using the Stephen Davis, Guns N' Roses history, or a Mick Wall Guns N' Roses history on this episode, a previous episode, and the one coming after it. Just so you know, you're going to hear a couple of the same catchphrases more than once, and a couple of accounts of certain events more than once, and that's by design. So let's get into it. Some accounts of the Izzy Stradlin and Vince Neil interaction centering around the MTV Video Music Awards from the book I Want My MTV by Rob Tenenbaum and Greg Marks. Tom Petty says, I played the VMAs with Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin from Guns N' Roses. We did Free Fallin' and Heartbreak Hotel. I thought it was kind of a shaky performance. We didn't get a lot of rehearsal time because Cher was doing a big production number and there wasn't much time for us. Hey, folks, quick edit here. I just listened to the next part, and at first I was like, was I drunk when I recorded this? But then I heard the next part, and I get really peppy because I'm doing a Sebastian Bach impression. And I guess I probably had a couple of beers, and decided I was going to be a little lackadaisical, like maybe Tom Petty would sound on this next bit, and then get really fired up like Sebastian Bach after that. So sorry for the interruption, but guess all I'm saying is I might have been kind of drunk, but not as drunk as I sound. Whatever. As we finished Heartbreak Hotel and walked off stage, Vince Neil from Motley Crue came running out of the wings and decked Izzy, hit him right in the face. Our sound guy, Jim Lenahan, was walking off stage with us, and Lenahan was like, I don't even know this Izzy kid, but he's with us, so he decked Vince Neil. Izzy was getting a lot of black eyes those days. I think he already had a black eye before Vince hit him. Sebastian Bach. Lead singer of Skid Row, if you're not familiar. I was on the side of the stage when Vince punched Izzy. Vince's gold bracelet flew off his wrist as he cracked Izzy. It was a big chunk of gold. Vince was huffing and puffing, and I was like, dude, I've got your bracelet. He's like, you can have it, man. In the day, if someone said something bad about your band, you were obliged to punch him. It was considered totally appropriate. Alan Niven says, Izzy and I were walking off stage when Vince came out of the darkness and whomped Izzy on the face, at which point I threw Vince on the floor and put my left hand around his throat. I cocked up my right arm to bury in his nose and had a moment of lucidity when where I looked at his rhinoplasty and said, that's too expensive, and let him up. Then Axl ran all over the building trying to find Motley and extend the dialogue further. It was very timely that Nikki had jumped into a limo and fled the scene. So just right there, we have two guys claiming that they were the ones that took out Vince Neil and kept Izzy safe. because there were no cellular phone cameras back then and not enough surveillance footage of the sort of side stage area. We'll probably never know, most of us, exactly how many of them are lying. Right. Now, I'm very openly biased when it comes to Guns N' Roses. Izzy's my favorite. Duff, second favorite, especially for his storytelling ability and his just general moral character. But I have to admit, I'm overly judgmental, or perhaps justifiably judgmental, towards Axl. For various reasons, if you are my age and grew up when I did. Now, in an attempt to correct that, or correct for that, I want to read a few pages straight out of Mick Wall's book. WAR, the unauthorized biography of William Axl Rose. And I will probably leave in a couple of bits here that appear elsewhere, either on the previous Guns N' Roses episode or later in this Guns N' Roses episode. It's been so long, I don't remember where a couple of these little snippets happen, because they're around 89, 90. And I'm leaving out the first good chunk of this interview, talking about 1 in a Million again. Talking about Izzy. And then it gets into this part here where I will just start, I think, justifiably, like reading verbatim. So I can hopefully convey what it's like to be in the room with Axl Rose at this time. And you can judge for yourself. It doesn't change anything, as far as what the guy did and how he treated people. I want to be clear about that. But Mick Wall says, as we spoke that night, Axl sat with his back to the balcony window, an undraped glass wall, the lights of the city twinkling behind his head like some vast, dark garden of fireflies. I sat opposite him with an impressive Art Deco glass coffee table planted solidly between us. This is the third one I've had, he remarked, running a hand lovingly across its surface. What happened to the other two? I asked politely. I got pissed and I smashed them, he replied matter-of-factly. At different times, he said, he had also smashed every mirror in the place and thrown his piano off the balcony. What drove him to such extremes, he said, were the same simple desires he walked off the bus with when he first arrived in LA 7 years ago. The simplest things still amused him, but the ugliest things were what enthralled him. I've got this little psycho ball. It's just the thing at times like this, he said, his voice as deep as a well. Where'd it go? He rummaged around among the empty Coke cans, cigarette packets, magazines, and ashtrays that littered the table. If you're a young person who doesn't know what it's like to have magazines all over your coffee table, imagine you had like a laptop open or a flat screen, like a Surface or an iPad, but it was as large as a table. 5 people could sit around it. And you had 15 tabs open in a browser. I guess that's the only thing I can compare it to. And other people are like, are you sure you don't want to close those? Do you want to put them in one tab or like an extension of some kind that like, you could save some memory, or it's very messy. No, I want them out so you'll see them all. So, because I don't know where they're going to go if I put them away. So very typical though for slovenly young people to have our magazines out all over the place. What are we going to do? Buy a bookshelf? Put them on that? Organize them in boxes like some kind of comic book collecting nerd? No. And he doesn't say what kind of magazines they are. So it could be like Rip Magazine and Hustler and Wii. That's OUI, not WII. But he doesn't say. I think if they were all the same magazine, he would probably say what they were. Let's see. Oh, then he found what he was looking for. A small, apparently harmless rubber ball. He squeezed it, and a terrible wheezing scream filled the room. Axel immediately cheered up. It's supposed to be for helping to relieve tension, he smiled. Then he gave it another squeeze. Another long, nerve-jangling wail filled the room. I use it all the time. It was January 1990, a few days after the New Year's holidays. I asked him how his Christmas had been, and he pulled a face. I had the worst New Year's and Christmas in my fucking life, man. As far as I was concerned. I'm in a good mood tonight because it's fucking over and I fucking lived through it. He had fucking hibernated, he said. Didn't see anybody. People say that's wrong, but it wasn't wrong. It worked out really good for me. Then last night I had like 8 people here, and I was in shock. 8 people that were all close friends. Like, whoa. Immediately it was like all heavy talk. This happened with my family. Oh, yeah? This happened with my girlfriend. Da-da-da. It was just heaviness all around. He began talking about West again. I assume West Arkeen. Who he had said just had his nose broken in a fight. He went down to a bar or a liquor store really drunk, and some guy said something, and he got in West's face. West said something back, and the guy just smashed a beer bottle in his nose. He scrutinized the walls. That's fucking unreal, huh? Axel sat there for a moment, skipping TV channels with the remote, gazing at several screens at once, all of them silent, like a scene from Welcome to the Jungle, minus the bouffant hairdo, a contemptuous smile on his face. Just prior to the October shows with the Stones, the band had shot a video for It's So Easy at the Cat House Club in LA, directed once again by Nigel Dick. I asked him why, as the song had already been a single over 2 years earlier. Were they thinking of re-releasing it, perhaps? A strange idea, since no radio station would be able to play it. We always wanted to do a video for that song, he said. We're going to have a home video at some point, so we wanted to do some videos that were like completely no holds barred, uncensored type of things, just live bootleg instead of worrying about whether MTV is going to play it. Just go out there and do a fucking blown out live, real risky video. It was during the Cat House shoot that Axel apparently got into an altercation with David Bowie, who he had taken umbrage with for supposedly flirting with Erin, which Erin Everly was Axel's girlfriend, who supposedly he wrote Sweet Child of Mine about. Bowie and I had our differences, he shrugged. And then we went out for dinner and talked and went to the China Club and stuff. Axel recalled how at the Stones shows, that was GNR opening for the Rolling Stones, along with Living Colour on the bill before them. See the previous episode of A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll that concerns Guns N' Roses. Ooh, I did a little Kurt Loder there. Woof. Unintentional, but what can I say? That voice. The voice is in there. It's a little Kurt Loder, it's a little Rod Serling, it's a little Orson Welles, it's a little of Donnie and Jeannie's eldest son from Yakima, Washington. Mix it all together, baby. And you got what you hear right now. Lucky you! Axl recalled how at the Stones shows, Mick Jagger and a visiting Eric Clapton had cornered him about Bowie. This is the part some of you have already heard, and or about to hear. I don't know. I don't know where I'm at with all the editing. Eric Clapton had cornered him about Bowie at the sound check. I'm sitting on this amp, and all of a sudden, they're both right there in front of me. And Jagger doesn't really talk a lot, right? He's just real serious about everything. And all of a sudden, he was like, "So you got in a fight with Bowie, did you?" I told him the story real quick, and him and Clapton are going off about Bowie in their own little world, talking about things from years of knowing each other. They were saying that when Bowie drinks, he can turn into a devil from Bromley. I mean, I'm not even in this conversation. I'm just sitting there. And every now and then, they would ask me a couple more facts about what happened, and then they would go back to bitching like crazy about Bowie. I was just sitting there going, wow. Bowie, though, was really cool, he said. We started talking about the business, and I never met anybody so cool and so into it and so whacked out and so sick in my life. And Bowie's sitting there laughing. And he starts talking about one side of me is experimental, and one side of me wants to make something that people get into. And I don't know fucking why. Why am I like this? And I'm like thinking to myself, I've got 20 more years of that to look forward to. I'm already like this. 20 more years? It was heavy, man. I asked Axl if he saw himself as the leader of Guns N' Roses. He certainly seemed to act that way. Listen, after working with Jagger, it was like, don't ever call me a dictator again, man. He smiled wanly. You can go and work for the Stones and you'll learn the hard way. Jagger, he said, was the one who makes it happen. With the looseness that those guys have and the amount of people around them, you need somebody being the general, you know? And he does it. He has to do it. Because the front man, you don't plan on that job. You don't want that job. You don't want to be that guy to the guys in your band that you hang with and you look up to. But somebody's got to do it. I remarked that it was 2 years since the band last recorded anything new in the studio. What had been delaying them, I wondered. The drug habits that Axl had referred to on stage at the Stones shows, perhaps? Partly, he acknowledged, but another reason things have been so hard in a way is this. The first album was basically written off Axl coming up with maybe one line and maybe a melody for that line or how I want to present that line, how I'm going to say it or yell it or whatever, okay? And then we build a song around it. Or someone came up with one line, okay? On this, Izzy's brought in 8 songs, at least. Slash has brought in an album. I've brought in an album. Duff brought in one song. He said it all in his one song. It's called Why Do You Look at Me When You Hate Me? And it's just badass. I wrote a bunch of words to that, but Duff brought in the song. As far as the next album is concerned, he said, if we can pull this thing off, if we do this right, it'll be 5 years before we have to make another album. And we can have 5 years to what? Well, it's not so much like 5 years to sit on our asses. It's like 5 years to figure out what we're going to say next, you know? After the crowd and the people figure out how they're going to react to this album, and then the mental changes we will go through, he tailed off. This record will have seen us grown a lot, he said eventually. There'll be some childish, arrogant, male, false bravado crap on there too. But there'll also be some really heavy, serious stuff. Musically, he said, you have a choice, man. You can grow or die, and it's like, that's what we have to do. We have to do it. We have to grow. We can't do the same sludge. I can't play sludge, man, for 20 fucking years. He said he saw himself as
reaching some sort of peak. He spoke earnestly of a couple of songs he was working on that, if they come off like I want them to, are going to be the biggest things this band has ever done. I was working on like writing these ballads that I feel have really rich tapestries and stuff, and making sure each note in effect is right, because it has to be the right note, and it has to be held in the right way, and it has to have the right effect, you know? He was referring specifically to a ballad he'd written called November Rain, a song he'd begun as a child, he said, but had only now brought to the band. If we get that right, he said, I can walk away from this. Walk away? Why would he want to do that? Because I've done it. Man, I can work a stadium now, you know? I've done it. So if I wanted to, I could walk away. He said that ultimately he preferred the whole business of recording to touring. And this is some insightful stuff, I'd say, here. Besides the fact, if I can backtrack for a second, that he's referring to the Use Your Illusion albums as something that they're all bringing in their huge amount of songs with, instead of like Axl has an idea and then they all build it up. And it seems like he was trying to portray it like, hey, I'd have an idea and then the guys would build up a song in real time. When, I mean, as we know about the songs that went on Use Your Illusion, a lot of them did come from pre-Appetite for Destruction. You know, some of them were the very false bravado, male, testosterone, angry stuff like Back Off Bitch, I believe, unless I'm misremembering, and stuff like Don't Cry was out there before Appetite for Destruction was released too. So I don't know if I agree with his portrayal of like, well, it's taking a long time because everyone's bringing in a ton of amazing songs individually. But the way of working, you know, on their own stuff and then bringing it in definitely is, I think, a relevant point for him to make. The fact that they're not, you know, and he's not saying that it in these words, but what I'm getting is like, hey, we used to just sort of all live in the same place and work on songs in real time and come up with them, and we were off to the races. And now there's a lot of pre-planning, there's a lot of sifting through stuff, there's a lot of, you know, there's probably a lot of like real discussion about, well, you know, whose songs are going to go on these records now that we're making a lot of money on songwriting. That's the stuff you don't say in interviews like this, and I'm not putting words in his mouth. He says, so the next part I was going to say about the shows, and I think this is a pretty good, I don't know, reverse foreshadowing of what's about to happen on tour with Guns N' Roses for the next 3 years after they do release the Use Your Illusion albums. If I'm psyched for the gig, great. 9 times out of 10, though, 9 times out of 10 at this point, you know, in their career. If I'm before the gig, I'll always not want to do the fucking show and hate it. I mean, I love it when I'm psyched. You know, let's go. But most of the time, I'm like mad about something. Something's fucking going wrong. I'm nervous. I'm like, I'm not playing for these fucking people. Not the crowd so much, but, you know, like situations are always different before a show. Something always fucking happens, and I react like a motherfucker to it. I don't like this pot-smoking mentality. He sucked in his cheeks. I feel like Lenny Kravitz, like, peace and love, motherfucker, or you're going to die. I'm going to kick your ass if you fuck with my garden, you know? I like that attitude more. That was a lot. I don't know what half of it meant. But these are the things that journalists cut out of big, huge interviews. And that could, I mean, that's the right thing to do because you don't want to portray someone like Axl Rose as a guy that doesn't want to be there and doesn't want to perform for people, you know, when he's probably already getting a lot of scrutiny for his behavior in a negative way. But, I mean, think about how many times this guy has spent hours with journalists and then read something that was, you know, that left out most of it, most of his context around things, and he feels betrayed. I could see that. Also, I assume this pot-smoking mentality is like people who just don't care, who just say whatever and do things no matter what's going on around them. I feel like there's a element to that attitude that he has about, like, well, I'm not taking it out on the fans. It's just that there's things going on that piss me off and make me not want to do the show. Hello, friends. Here's an abrupt edit. I have just chopped out almost 2
minutes of a socio-political digression I went on when I first recorded this. There was some things that were fresh in my mind that I was relating to this story about Axl and his not wanting to go on stage. I still think I was making good points because I'm biased that way, and I think I'm right about stuff. But I think it was just a case of like, is it recency bias that the folks call it these days? It's something, had just happened the day before, and I was relating it to Axl's association of one unconnected thing with another unconnected thing. And don't think it's necessary. I don't think it does any good to bring up. It's just let's just say it made me want to be more conscious of any tendency on my own part to do similar things like Axl is doing and like a good friend of mine is doing with socio-political issues that don't necessarily belong in the same category. But don't say I never did nothing for you. Now back to the audio. Now think about it from Axl's perspective. He's obviously disturbed by things no one else is taking seriously. That's all he feels. That's what he's getting. That's it. People don't understand. His band doesn't understand. They're mad at him for this. And he's incredibly sensitive to things that are beyond his control. And he's so angry about these things that are beyond his control that he is going to tank a show that, 10 to 20,000 people might have paid for, and they've been waiting for a long time for their favorite band to come to their town. And the band is excited to play because it's what they do. That's what they're on earth for. And they don't see any of the stuff that's getting in the way in Axl's mind. That's not their fault. Him being affected by things like that, that's not his fault, but his actions are. But we're talking about a rich guy that's still in his 20s. How do you correct for that? If you're the rich guy, you hire more people around you to advise you or make you feel better or calm you down. And then everyone says you're a weirdo. And you have a cult around you. And the people in Faith No More make fun of you for having this lady with whatever it was with the crystals and checking the vibrations of the stadiums they were playing before Guns N' Roses would agree to go on stage or whatever the hell it was. It's in a previous Guns N' Roses episode back from over a year ago. The Faith No More Guns N' Roses Audio Slave episode. Had the overwhelming fame thrust on him bolstered that attitude? What do you mean? He asked suspiciously. Forced you to be larger than life, I prodded. Obnoxious because you knew there would always be somebody there to take care of it? A long pause. No, I've always been that way, he said, eyes narrowed. But now I'm in a position to just be myself more. And the thing is, people allow me to do it whether they like it or not, That's a hell of a insight into yourself, I'd say. That's fairly mature. It's one of those things that, I think a lot of us have experienced in some ways. This might not be good. I can observe it, and I can label it, and I can call it out, but my behavior's not changing, Did he take advantage of that situation, though, to use the heights to which the public had elevated Guns N' Roses to shit on those he despised below? After a long pause. No, he eventually decided, no, usually I'm just emotionally unbalanced as a person. Maybe it's chemical, I don't know, because maybe emotions has something to do with the chemicals in your brain or whatever, so then it's a chemical imbalance. I'm usually an emotional wreck before a show anyway because of something else that's going on in my life or whatever. I mean, something weird will happen in my family. I finally found William Rose, okay? He was murdered in 1984 and buried in 7 miles of strip mining in Illinois. I found that out 2 days before a show, and I was whacked, right? It's fucking gnarly. He claimed he was disappointed not to have made the old man's acquaintance again. I was trying to uncover this mystery since I was a little kid, Because as a kid, I was always told that it was the devil that made me know what the inside of a house looked like that I supposedly never lived in. But I knew I did. I knew I lived in this house when I was a little kid. Weird things like that did happen, so I've been trying to track down this William Rose guy. Not I love this guy, he's my father.
I just wanted to know about my heritage and what my hereditary traits might be. Am I gonna have an elbow that bugs the shit out of me in like 3 or 4 years? Is that a hereditary trait or what? I wanted to know. I asked if he knew exactly how his father had died. No, but it was probably like at close range, man, he deadpanned. Wonderful family, man, just wonderful. I wanted to return to what he said earlier about walking away. Could Axel now really leave this behind, I wondered. Not just financially, but artistically, spiritually, emotionally even. If he wanted to, could Axel really turn his back on Guns N' Roses and just walk away? If I wanted to badly enough, he asserted, this is all right in bits and pieces, but whether it'll take up all the chapters in the book of my life, I don't know. But I'll write in bits and pieces, whether I ever compose it into a book or not, for the rest of my life. I'll always do that. But I would also like to record for a long time, and I have to make this next album. Then it doesn't matter. This album is the album I've always been waiting on. Our second album is the album I've been waiting on since before we got signed. I mean, we were planning out the second album before we started work on the first one. This is the thing, okay? But as much as it means to me, yeah. If it bombed or whatever, if that would happen, yeah. I'm sure I'd be bummed out business-wise and let down or whatever. But at the same time, it doesn't matter. It's like, I got it out there, So what? That's the artistic thing. And then I could walk away. What about the money, though? I'd like to make the cash off the touring, he said. I'd like to walk away knowing that, I can support my kids for whatever they want for the rest of their lives off my interest rates, I'd like to have that security. I've never known any security in my whole life, Some people are like, oh, why don't you give the money to this or that? You have all this money. I'm like, well, no, I got a certain interest rate and I bought my security. You bought your house, didn't you? I worked for my livelihood too, I have that in the bank now and I'll keep it, What I can spend off interest and shit like that, I'll do, but I don't want to give away my security unless I'm forced to. Yeah. The only thing that he really cared about now, he said, was this damn album, man. It's like Guns N' Roses doesn't fully function. Nothing ever really happens to its utmost potential unless it's a kamikaze run. Unless it's this is it, man. Fuck it. Let's go down in fucking flames with this motherfucker, I wasn't sure that I did, actually. Instead, I watched him draw another cigarette from the pack, light it, inhale. Now, the use of Welcome to the Jungle in the Deadpool, 1988. The Guns N' Roses FAQ references the fact that this was the fifth and final appearance of Clint Eastwood as Inspector Dirty Harry Callahan in the Deadpool films. Or sorry, the Dirty Harry films, this one called The Deadpool. And he notes, not to be confused with the 2016 superhero film Deadpool. Yeah, why do you suppose there's a connection, you dork? I don't know. Maybe because back in 1990, it was 1990, I believe, Rob Liefeld ripped this off and called his assassin character Deadpool. And Deadpools have, I don't know if they were a thing before this movie, but I mean, they might have been in gambling circles, just gambling over what cluster of people are going to die first, especially in celebrity circles. But it's because Rob Liefeld is creatively bankrupt and he had to just rip off the name of a movie that came out two years previous. And he can't draw feet, he can't draw hands, and or human anatomy of any kind. Sorry, I was one of those kids that bought all those comics in the early 90s. It was filmed on location in San Francisco and starred Patricia Clarkson as blah, 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 blah. Liam Neeson as slasher film director Peter Swan, Evan Kim as Dirty Harry's new partner Al Kwan, David Hunt as deranged villain Harlan Rook, and a then unknown Jim Carrey in only his second film after 1985's Once Bitten, so that means this was before Earth Girls Are Easy, as a drug-addled rock star Johnny Squares, The Deadpool, which was directed by Buddy Van Horn, Any Which Way You Can. Dirty Harry attempts to stop a serial killer who is preying on celebrities and soon finds himself in the psychopath's crosshairs. Along the way, he gets the opportunity to deliver some vintage Dirty Harry witticisms such as, "Fuck with me, buddy, I'll kick your ass so hard you'll have to unbutton your collar to shit." The film's soundtrack features Carrie lip-syncing Welcome to the Jungle in a truly awful music video that spoofs The Exorcist. In addition, all of the Guns N' Roses band members can be viewed in a cameo during the Johnny Squares funeral scene. If you blink, you'll miss it. No, you won't. No, you fucking won't, Rich Weidman. It's very obvious. They're all together at the funeral. They're lined up side to side. And then there's other shots of them milling around and walking among the other mourners. It is not a blink and you miss it moment at all. It's very clear. Hey, look, it's Guns N' Roses. Literally the most popular band in the fucking universe right now in this movie. Young people who don't really care about Dirty Harry. There you go. Also, during the filming of the nightmare scene, Slash accidentally fires a harpoon through a window on the pirate tugboat. Spoiler alert. Dirty Harry himself later wields the harpoon gun against the film's villain in the final scene. As expected, the brief film shoot featured its fair share of GNR style debauchery. For instance, Stephen Adler, in his 2010 autobiography, My Appetite for Destruction, details how he picked up a stripper chick who was serving as an extra on the set. After they smoked some weed, Adler noticed that she slipped a brown powder into his cup of tea. According to Adler, the last thing I remember, she had my head between her legs and was forcing my face against her groin. Now I'll show you how to eat pussy, she purred. She was in control, and I was floating away without a care in the world. I'm assuming the brown powder would be heroin. I don't know. I'm a bit of a schoolboy still when it comes to that stuff. But as for the Deadpool, the film received rather mixed reviews, with Vincent Canby of the New York Times describing it as a mini-movie in the company of a mythic figure. The late-great film critic Roger Ebert called it a smart, quick, made with real wit. He fucking sucks. Jesus. The Dirty Harry film series also includes Dirty Harry, Magnum Force, The Enforcer, and Sudden Impact. I gotta say, I don't have a lot of love for Dirty Harry, but I have more love for John Milius, who wrote the first film uncredited, and I think he got credit on the second film. He's the guy responsible for what you know of as Dirty Harry. Really, the lines, the mentality, the whole point of view, the whole right wing dude in San Francisco, in Reagan's America, where he's a non politically correct badass guy in a world that's trying to make everyone more sensitive and more PC and give criminals more rights and get them back out on the street. It's a fantasy thing, but it's there for a reason, and it's effective for a reason. Milius also wrote and directed Red Dawn. He also directed Conan the Barbarian. He's done a ton of stuff, or he did a ton of stuff in the 70s and 80s that was, I believe, quality shit. There's a good documentary about him called Milius. He seems like a pretty wild dude. He's one of those guys that came up with Spielberg, and oh my God, Francis Ford Coppola. The John Milius is the guy that wrote Apocalypse Now. He talked about being like college age and seeing people on the campus with a peace button that said Serenity Now. And he actually he graphically designed his own button where the peace symbol was turned to the side and redesigned to look like was a B-15 bomber or B-20? I forget what model bomber it was. And it said Apocalypse Now instead. That was the genesis of that whole idea. Funny enough, George Lucas actually wanted to direct the film first before Coppola, but he wanted to make it more of a documentary style, like a fake documentary about Vietnam, where you were down there in it with the soldiers, and you would tell the story that way. I assume I don't have to tell you that Apocalypse Now is really good, or it's awful, depending on your point of view, or it's not awful but quality, but it's something you hate, I suppose, because you had an annoying boyfriend at some point that made you watch the Redux version of it. I don't know. But if you're curious, the Milius documentary has a cool scene with Charlie Sheen, son of Martin Sheen, talking about how Milius sort of physically and verbally intimidated his dad while his dad was recording voiceovers by forcing him to hold a gun in his hand and point it at him, because his narration, his voiceovers were not very intense for the part that they needed to be. And he was like, my dad's a pacifist. He hates guns. He doesn't like touching them or being around them. But he's like, there's one in the clip
No, sorry. He's like, the clip is full. There's one in the chamber. One round in the chamber. Pull the hammer. Pull this back. I don't have the terminology right. It's been too long since I've even fucking held a pistol in my hands. Do it. Do it. It's like, no. It's like, do it now. Point it at me. Point it at my head. That's what it feels like. It's very cute. I love it. I love the whole. I've watched the documentary like 3 or 4 times. There's a lot of sort of bullshit towards the end where like they spend all this time explaining how hard Milius was to deal with in the 70s and how much money he took from other people and then didn't deliver the script until like 3 weeks after the deadline or something. And like he would just like take the budget for what he was getting paid for and like demand like prostitutes and motorcycles and guns and just fuck around and spend all this money and then deliver nothing. But when he did deliver, it was good stuff, and it was profitable stuff on tons of different movies. He earned a reputation for punching up other people's scripts. Notably, The Hunt for Red October. He wrote the speeches that Sean Connery gave in that film because Sean Connery refused to do the movie otherwise. He didn't have a good spotlight for him, like verbally, to deliver. And they hired Milius to keep Sean Connery interested. And then so the bullshit part I'm referring to is at the end where they're like, well, he did Red Dawn, it was a huge hit, and Hollywood didn't want to work with someone so right wing anymore. And then they have a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger who's like, I was the governor of California. I'm very right wing, and in my experience, if you're making money for the studios, they'll hire you. It doesn't matter what your politics are. And I think he's right. I think Hollywood's the most capitalist public entity we have in our economy, quite frankly, that the public is aware of and thinks is completely left wing and communist. Good heavens! But yeah, I mean, dude, like it's just so funny. Like, did the makers of the documentary not pay attention to the last 90 minutes they just showed me of although endearing, like what a psychopath he was to deal with business wise? Like, well, then it was too politically incorrect to hire John Milius, and and that's why he hasn't worked on movies ever since The Flight of the Intruder, and then oh God, that's how you know you're old, when you watch documentaries over and over again, even though they're wrong and they're lying to you, and you still enjoy it. I mean, that's how I know I am old. I got there 10 years ago, but I assume 17-year-old kids feel that way already, though, these days. Bless their hearts. Good for them. Nothing's real, kids. Nothing is real.
We do taking names and writing them down. Now, as the name taking is over, the honey kicking gonna stop. It's gonna start now. It's gonna run through the summer, and it's hot, hot, hot in public, if you will.
Okay, have to tell a Slash story here because it's just one of many fascinating drug stories in his book. If you haven't read his book, this will give you a window into what awaits you if you do buy it and read it. If you have read his book, I apologize because you're about to hear a story that probably pokes out in your mind as one of the most memorable sections of his life story. For anyone curious, the Slash book has a lot of great insight into his relationship with Axl and the rest of the guys in Guns N' Roses. It also has a lot of drug stories. He fesses up to pretty much everything he's done, throughout his whole life that is, illegal and dangerous, and also all the women he's cheated on and his personal relationships. So if you want to know more about that stuff, it's a great book for you. It's not going to be, an authoritative beginning to end Guns N' Roses history. There's other books that you'll need to read for that. They're out there. They're written by Stephen Davis and Mick Wall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, you could do worse than to read every book written by a member of Guns N' Roses and sort of put together their sides of all the stories too. Anyhow, this is a incident that takes place during the Rolling Stones opening shows at the Coliseum. he has, at Axl's demand, gone on stage and told the crowd that he's gonna be a sober person and not do the drugs that make Axl mad. So, you know, he says, when the time came, I walked out there, and rather than apologize, I went into some banter about heroin and what it can do to you and how we've been around the block a few times, how I'd done my time with a seductive beast. It was more amusing than anything else because I didn't want to bring the audience down at all. I have a way of mumbling when I talk anyway, so I think the mention of the reality of drugs and whatever else I said came off as an apology enough. We did a long intro into Mr. Brownstone as I spoke, so from an audience perspective, it sounded like an impromptu introduction to the song. Whatever it was and wasn't, once Doug told Axl that I did it because he refused to leave the dressing room until I did, Axl was pleased and the vibe of the whole band turned around as he walked out on stage and we launched into Mr. Brownstone. Suddenly our camaraderie returned. Once those personal issues were handled, we were able to focus on the playing. That second show was fine. The third was even better. We really got it all down by then. The fourth show was fucking amazing. We were at our best. Those dates were an experience, to say the least. They are renowned on the bootleg circuit, and anyone that was there remembers them very well. Even on the nights that we were off, they were nonetheless entertaining. The Stones watched us for all 4 nights, I've been told, because we reminded them of themselves back in the day. Not that I spent any time hanging out with them. I was too strung out. Despite whatever I'd said on stage, all I cared about was getting my fix as soon as possible once the last chord was played. I did it in the parking lot usually. I couldn't wait to get to the hotel. As much as I was inspired by those shows, I started to look at the band and writing our album as something I'd get to once I got clean. It's a famous junkie mantra. And as I recall, he does this a lot. He's very, very honest about a lot of his behaviors and says, this is typical junkie behavior. Like, unlike a lot of other people, Slash doesn't try to make you think he's special in the way he lived his life as a junkie or an alcoholic. To get the drugs I needed for those 4 nights, I once had to leave the hotel to drive into Hollywood and wait for my smack, then go back downtown for the gig. You can be on such a level, playing the Coliseum, but if you're a junkie, you also exist in the scrungy reality of copping your shit in the street, grassroots style. You do it and then go back to your other reality. I didn't want that to happen again, so for the 3rd gig, I gave this dealer, we'll call Bobby, backstage passes so that he could come down and bring me my shit and see the show. I was backstage waiting for him to show up, and as it got close to my showtime, I started to feel ill. The clock was ticking, and I was at the point where I was unable to play. I was full of anxiety because if he didn't get there in time, then I wouldn't be able to go on stage. I was waiting. I was beeping him. Beeping means sending a digital message to a beeper via a landline. A pager on this person's belt goes off, and there's a little digital readout with maybe a message in numerical form or a couple of letters or things like that. For the young folks that don't know what beeping is, I was trying to keep up appearances. I was beeping him. He was not answering. Literally 10 minutes before we went on, Bobby showed up. I locked myself in the bathroom in the trailer we called a dressing room, and I got high. Breathed a sigh of relief. It was not good. Axl had every reason to make the point that he did. That kind of existence just couldn't work at the level we were at. When you're that caught up in heroin, it's not about the music anymore. I had forgotten that. Steven was in an equally bad place, but until I got clean again, I didn't have any idea of what was going on with him at all. And also, I should say that if you want some more insight into Steven Adler's, sort of side of things, as it relates to his best buddy Slash's book is a good resource there too. And I know I probably said this on a previous episode, but like it always the mainstream narrative joke when Steven was kicked out and afterwards in retrospective documentaries and behind the music and stuff was like, it's just an easy joke for people to make. How the hell do you have the balls to kick out someone from Guns N' Roses for doing too many drugs? Like, how dare you? But I think Axl hit hard. I mean, he went through heroin pretty quickly and got clean from it
he saw Izzy go through it, his best friend from the old days, and how it affected him. Then he saw Slash go through it, and he put his foot down in a big way, in a big public way. And then it was Steven's turn. And by then, I'm sure he's just, nope, I'm not doing this again. Not for the drummer. Maybe. Not for the drummer who's the best friend of the guy that just put me through this. Get it together now or else. And you can read Mick Wall's Axl Rose book for some more details on the nitty gritty of that era. Putting Steven basically kicking Steven out, bringing him back, putting him on a kind of probation, a different contract than everybody else, that kind of thing. And then, of course, I'm sure Steven's book has some legal details as well. Let's see. Maybe I should jump into some of that. I should do something from Steven's book before this episode's over, right? I owe it. I owe it to the guy. Izzy's the only one that didn't write a book, damn it. I would do a whole episode of just this. Just the whole thing from Izzy's perspective, and everybody would probably hate me. Anyways, back to Slash's narrative. Doug thought that he could pull off a soft intervention with Steven by taking him on vacation to an exclusive golf resort in Arizona. Steven was excited by what the band had just done, so at least in theory, he wanted to get his act together. He agreed that a week away from L.A., chilling by the pool in the desert, was all that he needed. I was a more complicated animal, suggesting rehab wasn't going to go over well, and neither was being looked after. Actually, no one could tell me shit at the time. They had to trust that I was going to get it together on my own, and I fully intended to. I thought about how to go about it over the course of many nights spent high up in the Walnut House. I had a doctor prescribe me Buprenex, which was an opiate blocker. He'd get me bottles of that and syringes. It was a very expensive treatment, but this guy was a kind of Dr. Feelgood, not the type of guy who had a real legitimate practice to speak of. I brought all that with me the night I spontaneously decided to join Steven and Doug in Arizona. It made complete sense to me at the time. Arizona sun was a great place to begin scaling back my habit. I told Megan that I had some band shit to do and I'd be back in 4 days. I booked my flight, I called a limo, and I called a drug dealer that I knew who was located on the way to the airport. I had it all figured out. I copped enough coke and heroin and packed all the Buprenex to get me through a nice, mellow, long weekend at a golf resort. I hadn't called Doug or Steven to let them know I was coming, so when I landed there that night, I was on my own. There wasn't much going on around town, but I didn't care. Hey, how far is this place? I asked the limo driver. About 45 minutes, sir, he said. Okay, listen, can you stop off somewhere to get me some silverware? I asked. I've got some food back here that I really want to eat. The driver drove for about 20 minutes and stopped at a Denny's, came out, handed me a knife and a fork wrapped in a napkin. Great, I thought. Hey, I said, listen, is there anywhere else we can stop? I need a full set of silverware. I think you all probably know where this is going, right? Another 15 minutes, we stopped again. This time I got the spoon. I promptly put up the divider between the driver and me, got my drugs out, and cooked up my meal. I did my fix and relaxed while we drove to the hotel. The scrappy underbrush of the Arizona landscape suddenly looked more inviting, and the tinted glass made it look even more lush. When we got to the resort, the Venetian, I took my one-man party into my room. It wasn't the kind of place that I was used to because it didn't look like a hotel. It was a collection of bungalows along a beautifully manicured golf course. A lot like that place Doug took me to in Hawaii, come to think of it. My room was great. There was these sheer white curtains around the bed, a small Adobe-style fireplace, and a bathroom with a glass-enclosed shower. It was like a well-appointed spa. It was so relaxing that I could think of no better therapy than shooting coke and smack all night to soothe my soul. I soon forgot that the shit I brought was meant to last me 4 days. I was acting as if I had something to celebrate. Within hours, I was out of heroin. It is a common problem for junkies. When you're high, you're in a nice, contented state. Everything is good and mellow, and that's when you make your plans. That's when you figure out how much dope you need. Then you start doing your dope, and everything changes. You reposition everything as you're going. You find reasons why you can and should do a hit right now. And once you've done that, you find a reason why you should just finish what you have because, hey, you won't need it later. You do all this crazy psycho shit because when it comes right down to it, the day you first did heroin, the time that you did it and loved it, when your system was pure and unadulterated, that was the best time you'll ever have doing it. You'll spend the rest of your career, your using career chasing that high. that you'll never find again. So you convince yourself that you will get back there if you just keep at it. You try all different methods of getting there, but you're chasing a ghost. You end up needing to get high just to feel well. You want just enough to not feel bad. Just enough to get you to feel fine. But when you have a nice amount of it, you still try to find your original high. And before you know it, in one night, you've gone through what you plan to ration yourself for 4 days. Your careful planning is fucked. There was no reason to stop the party, as far as I was concerned, since there was plenty of coke left to shoot. No matter how meticulous you are with the smack, it will always be done well before the coke. And when you really start shooting coke, the hallucinations you get are so real that you can no longer tell yourself that you're just high and it's your mind playing tricks on you. It's like being on acid with a whole different attitude. It's scary and realistic and not at all psychedelic. In my case, it got violent and terrifying. I had enjoyed that element of the drug in the past, but this time I went over the edge. I kept shooting coke that night just to keep shooting. I've mentioned how I liked sticking the needle through my skin into the vein and feeling the drugs enter my body and take over. I also love the ritual, the cooking, the straining, and the tying off almost as much as the high. I was pretty content with myself just going through those motions for a few hours. And then things got weird. I started shadowboxing monsters that I saw on the other side of the sheer curtains that framed the large king-size bed. I was bobbing and weaving as if I was working out at a gym. This shadowboxing continued all night long until the sun came up, drowning every shadow in the room and ending my activity. Once I snapped out of that trance, I figured I should probably head out in search of Steven and Doug. First, I decided to shower to straighten up a bit, but before that, I opted for one last shot of coke. I felt great when I got under the big rain-style luxury shower head. And as I was there under the nice warm water, the coke hallucinations hit me harder than they had that night or ever before. Full daylight was coming in through the skylight, but I watched as long shadows emerged from the corners. They crept up the floor toward me, up the glass of the shower, took the shape of the shadow monsters I'd boxed earlier. They were right in front of me, filling the glass door, and I wasn't going to let them get me, so I punched them as hard as I could, sending the entire pane of glass into pieces all over the floor. I stood there with a cut hand, under the water, paralyzed, paranoid, scanning the bathroom for other assailants, and that's when my little buddies showed up. And now, in the interest of variety, I will pause there, and we will return to Slash's story in a little bit, because we have need for balance. Let's stop talking about someone I respect and admire who's made musical works that have affected my life and yours. And let's then instead pivot to someone I dislike and don't respect and has done very little creatively in the world. As a creator, that is. I don't mean, not to say he didn't do things and publish things, but you'll know. You'll know in a minute.
And a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Jay, we've heard some of your views on the Dirty Harry Callahan film, The Deadpool. But what about professionals? How well was it received when it came out? Well, I just so happen to have a July 13th, 1998 review from Roger Ebert, the late Roger Ebert, that pompous old windbag. What did the most prominent film critique in America for 2 decades have to say? He says, the little twitch comes and goes so fast, it's easy to miss. It's in the corner of Dirty Harry's face, and it betrays the seething anger hidden beneath his mask of calm. It's not even anger, really, that seethes inside there, but indignation that criminals are going free while the San Francisco Police Department devotes itself to public relations. What's interesting about the twitch is that it comes just at the right moment early in the movie. and the audience is waiting for it. There's actually a cheer when they see it. Rarely have the mental states of a series movie character become more familiar than those of Dirty Harry's. The dead pool is the fifth in the series, and most of the people watching it will have seen the other four. They know of Harry's impatience with bureaucracy and his willingness to go it alone, one-on-one with criminals in his path. Like the fans of a familiar opera, Dirty Harry fans wait for the key moments. All right, so already we've got the Dirty Harry films compared to opera. We've got the statement that, basically all of America is familiar with him, and people cheered in the theater, supposedly whatever theater he was in, where he probably, I don't know, hangs out with normal people on premiere night. I think he probably just watches VHS screeners in his bedroom in 1988, but what would I know? Maybe he gets some premiere access, but he's in Chicago. He's not in like LA for the Hollywood premieres or anything. I don't know, man. But just in case you had yourself convinced that it was only, film, the rock journalists and music journalists were the ones that were full of themselves and bought into all their own hoopla. The film guys, obviously, especially in the 80s, could be full of it too. Now there's like a million websites, and everyone's full of their own shit, of course, when it comes to critiquing movies. There's a million YouTube channels. But let's see, what else does he say? After the twitch, we know that before long there will be two more. The moment when Inspector Harry Callahan is called on the carpet in his superior's office and given a severe dressing down, and the moment not long after when he is suspended from active duty. So yeah, he's just saying these are formulaic movies. We've seen it all a million times, but it's good that because he likes it. Unless my memory fails, Harry has solved all of his cases while on suspension. The balancing act in a good Dirty Harry movie is between the familiar notes, which must remain the same every time, and the new angles in every case. The Deadpool, which is as good as the original Dirty Harry. Oh, sure it was. Yes, and Rambo Last Blood was just as good as First Blood. Sure. Has lots of new angles and lots of things to say, especially about horror films, television news, and the burden of being a celebrity. Yeah, I'll give you the third one. I'll give you a little bit of the second one, but the first one, I of course Roger Ebert loves this film because he hates the whole horror genre, hates it. He'll admit he's like a sexist or a racist that is nice to like their wife or a minority coworker they had, while they really have no respect for all the other people that fall into those categories. I'm sure he's had like nice things to say about a movie like Rosemary's Baby or maybe The Exorcist. He said something nice about. I'm not going to go look it up because being a teenager in the 90s, you were just, if you're into hard rock, heavy metal, and horror movies and comic books, you had so much public outcry. Even after there was a lot in the 80s too, but even after that, you just see all these clips of people like Roger Ebert, like telling you that you're an awful person that just hates women if you like horror movies and slasher films. And also he'd say that out. He'd say terrible things about movies like Blue Velvet, like you're just awful if you like that kind of thing. Now, Mr. Ebert goes on to say the title comes from a macabre gambling game that is played in San Francisco as the movie opens. A list of 8 celebrities has been distributed, and people take bets on which of the 8 will be the first to die. The winner takes the pool. And before long, of course, Harry Callahan's name is on the list. Why? Of course, why? Because he's famous? Because he's that famous in this part of the series compared to other celebrities? One of the players in the Deadpool is Peter Swan, Liam Neeson, a monomaniacal British horror film director who is making a rock video in San Francisco. One of the names on the list is a drug-addicted rock star who is starring in the video. That's played by our good old boy, Ace Ventura. But when the rock star is found dead, the director naturally is a prime suspect. Harry thinks the plot runs deeper than that, and he is right. In the course of the investigation, he crosses paths with Samantha Walker, Patricia Clarkson, an aggressive TV reporter who is constantly shoving her camera in Harry's face. One day, Harry grabs her camera and throws it as far as he can. But in no time, the two of them are having candlelit dinners and discussing the problems of fame. Problems that Harry has thought about much more deeply and interestingly than Samantha. I mean, that whole last paragraph should make a critic go, yeah, it's kind of dumb. Kind of dumb. It's kind of maybe implicitly sexist. That a woman chasing fame and attention and, you know, seeking to gain fame off of someone else as a reporter has not thought about the effects of fame the way poor Harry Callahan has, who's just recently gotten famous in the last few years because of his public record as a cop. I don't know. As the movie develops, we get point of view glimpses that clue us into the fact that someone is killing the members of the Deadpool and trying to frame the hapless Peter Swan. These shots arrive at some sort of climax in a brilliant and inspired scene, in which Harry's car is pursued up and down the hills of San Francisco by another car that is filled with powerful plastic explosives. The gimmick is that the other car is a model only about a foot long, and so the suspense is intermixed with the hilarious parody of the chase scene in Bullet. It is highly doubtful that such a small car could travel that fast, but what the hell? He's given this movie a lot of, you know, whatever. The best thing about the Deadpool is the best thing about almost all Clint Eastwood's movies. The film is smart, quick, and made with real wit. It's never just a crude action movie bludgeoning us with violence. It's self-aware. It knows who Dirty Harry is and how we react to him, and it has fun with its intelligence. Also, of course, it bludgeons us with violence. All right, so he's admitting he's got a little bit of a hypocrite at the end. I wonder if he would say the same about the movie Scream. It's not just a crude slasher movie bludgeoning us with violence. It's self-aware. Scream was self-aware. It knows who the character is and how we react to them, and it has fun with its intelligence. Just for comparison, let's find out what he said about Scream. 1996. 3 stars. All right, 3 out of 5. Let's go just to the end wrap up. What does he say? What did I think of this movie? As a film critic, I liked it. I liked the in-jokes and the self-aware characters. So, okay, he's consistent. Roger Ebert, I give you the consistent man ribbon for the day. At the same time, I was aware of the incredible level of gore in this film. It is really violent. It is not really gory. It is violent. It is not really gory. Is the violence diffused by the ironic way the film uses it and comments on it? For me, it was. For some viewers, it will not be, and they will be horrified. But they wouldn't go to the fucking movie. Which category do you fall in? Here's an easy test. When I mentioned Fangoria, did you know what I was talking about? I guess he mentioned Fangoria early in the article. I'm not going to read it. I just want to say, by comparison, Reservoir Dogs got how many stars? 2.5. Okay, now back to Slash and his little buddies. Slash says, they always look like the creature in Predator to me, but a fraction the size and translucent blue-gray. They were wiry and muscular with the same pointed heads and rubbery-looking dreadlocks. They'd always been a welcome, carefree distraction, but this hallucination was sinister. I could see them gathering in the doorway. There was an army of them holding tiny machine guns and weapons that looked like harpoons. I was terrified. I ran across the glass on the floor and slammed the sliding glass door to the bathroom shut. Blood began to form in a pool under me, issuing out from my feet, but I didn't feel a thing. I watched in horror as the predators squeezed their limbs between the door and door frame and began to slide it open. I put all my weight against it in an effort to hold it shut. but it was no use. They were winning, and I was losing my balance on all the broken glass. I decided to flee. I broke through the sliding glass door, cutting myself further and spraying debris all over the room. When I ran out of the bungalow, the bright sunlight, the shocking green of the grass, and the colors of the sky were overwhelming. Everything was jarring and vivid to me. Everything in my room had been so real that I was not prepared, in my condition, to be suddenly transported from the drawn curtains into the shimmering daylight. I just ran, fully naked, bleeding, down the fairway, away from the army of predators I saw over my shoulder every time I turned to look. I needed a reprieve from the harsh daylight, so I ducked through the open door of another bungalow. I hid behind the door, then behind a chair, as the predators began to fill up the room. There was a maid in there, making the bed, and she started to scream when she saw me. She screamed louder when I tried to use her as a human shield to protect myself from the small hunters on my trail. I fled again, running at top speed through the resort with a translucent army at my heels. The colors and scenery only added to my dementia. I made it to the back of the main clubhouse and went through the back door and into the kitchen. All of the cooks and activity were dizzying, so I ran out of there right into the lobby. There were guests and staff everywhere, and I remember grabbing a well-dressed businessman standing there with his luggage, once again using him as a human shield. He seemed so together that I believed he could hold the predators at bay, but I was wrong. They actually got to me at that point and started climbing up my legs, loading their little guns. The businessman didn't want anything to do with me. He shook free, so I backed into a utility closet somewhere near the kitchen. As a crowd gathered, I ran out of there again, back outside, eventually finding darkness and shelter in a shed on the fairway, where I hid behind a lawnmower. And finally, the hallucinations began to subside. I'd caused quite a bit of commotion by then. The cops had arrived, and along with a crowd of onlookers, they confronted me in my hiding place. I wasn't seeing the predators anymore. When I gave the cops my testimony, it involved a detailed recreation of how they'd chased me all over the resort trying to kill me. I was still high enough that I told the story without a shred of self-consciousness. Everything around me still looked pretty bizarre, even when Stephen broke through the crowd and handed me a pair of sweatpants. The cops took me back to my room and found a bag full of syringes, but no drugs. And since I had a prescription for Buprenex, which did not get you high, I was allowed to have syringes and nothing seemed amiss. Still, the Arizona police weren't buying it. And at some point, they left me in the room to discuss among themselves what to do with me. I was still convinced that everything I told them had happened, which didn't help exonerate me at all. They kept staring at me like, okay. They eventually took me in once they found Coke residue in the spoon on the floor. But Doug stepped in. He called Danny Zalisco, this high-powered promoter in Phoenix, who managed to keep me out of jail. Doug and Danny hustled me out of their -1 shoe because one of my feet was far too injured to wear one. They got me onto a private jet and flew me the fuck out of there. Without Danny's help, I was looking at serious jail time. Thank you again. I was going to talk about the climate in '87 as far as rock music goes and what was popular. And granted, Appetite came out in '87, as we know. The hits, didn't come in strong and hard for GNR as much during that year as they did in '88, where they would just be like, Welcome to Jungle, Paradise City, and Sweet Child of Mine just knocking down everyone's doors, right? But this is not I'm not going to just read a list of the top 10 hottest tracks of '87, but I've pulled these notes from two different websites. Let it be known, I did just type in Billboard 1987, top 40 rock hits, and I didn't get anything from Billboard coming up on the Google results. So I don't know what their problem with SEO is, but guys, call me. I do that kind of thing sometimes. I got these from a couple of other websites I've never fucking heard of. But this is all stuff I can tell you for a fact. As a child of 9 years old, I heard these all on the radio for the most part. If I didn't hear them on the radio, they were on radio somewhere else outside of maybe the Seattle, Washington area, and definitely on MTV. Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now by Starship. La Bamba by Los Lobos, which we will get to very soon. I'm finally prepping the La Bamba episode, folks. If you've been with me since the early days of this podcast, and why wouldn't you be? Or if you haven't gone back to the old episodes, and why wouldn't you? They're all evergreen, I promise. You can listen to any of them anytime you want, if you're interested in the musicians or the film covered. And even if you're not, just listen to them anyway, because it's me, and you like me. You've gotten this far. You clearly like me. We've got a thing. You and I. Put it on while you fall asleep. I don't care. Ignore me. Put it on all day. Ignore me. That's fine. Then this one's huge. I Got My Mind Set on You by George Harrison. Need You Tonight by INXS. How do I get you alone by Heart. I mean, Bad Animals was everywhere. My mom had that cassette tape. With or Without You by U2. I'll never forget my parents going through a divorce pretty soon around this time, and it was like, what was it? My dad, With or Without You by U2 came on the radio one day when me and my brother and my dad were in the car, and he's like, this is the song that makes me think about your mother. I was like, I don't want to know that, Dad. No one wants to know. I'm not your buddy. I'm your son. But just to even things out, Mom definitely told us that that goddamn Don Henley song that, and I think it's bad, and I think it's a bad forgiveness, even if you don't love me anymore. Now, there's a theme going through all these that there's one or two themes. Here I Go Again by Whitesnake. Little Lies by Fleetwood Mac. Is This Love by Whitesnake. Big Love by Fleetwood Mac. Hazy Shade of Winter by the Bangles. Shakedown by Bob Seger. That's from Beverly Hills Cop 2, which I hate to admit it. I thought that was like one of those guys from the Eagles, like Don Felder or somebody doing a solo thing. I didn't realize that was Bob Seger. Def Leppard, Pour Some Sugar on Me. Don't Dream It's Over by Crowded House. Everywhere by Fleetwood Mac. Brilliant Disguise by Bruce Springsteen. Devil Inside, INXS. Moni Moni, Billy Idol. Where the Streets Have No Name by U2. Mandolin Rain by Bruce Hornsby and the Range. Carrie by Europe. Walk the Dinosaur by Was Not Was. Richard Marx, Don't Mean Nothing. Oh man, he was on his way up. He was coming out with something big after this. Don't you worry, America. And then Should Have Known Better by Richard Marx. Another list has Living on a Prayer, Tunnel of Love by Bruce Springsteen. Still haven't found what I'm looking for. Touch of Grey by Grateful Dead. On the Turning Away by Pink Floyd. I'm No Angel, Greg Allman. The One I Love, R.E.M. Learning to Fly by Pink Floyd. Some song called Give to Live by Sammy Hagar. I bet that sucked. And he was in Van Halen. Like, they had a second Van Halen album was about, OU2 was on its way out, right? Was coming out in another year. Lou Gramm, Tom Petty, The Heartbreakers, INXS, John Cougar Mellencamp. Yes, Love Will Find a Way. Who Will You Run To by Heart. Alone, again, yeah, we did that one by Heart. Rhythm of Love by Yes. Not Rhythm of Love by the Scorpions, which is probably better. Eddie Money, there's Shakedown again. Robbie Robertson from the band had a song called Showdown at Big Sky. And Seven Wonders by Fleetwood Mac, Big Love by Fleetwood Mac. These are all songs that were big hits in 87 on the rock charts, right? So, what am I seeing for patterns? Well, you've got adult contemporary artists that came out of the 60s, right? Like adult contemporary rock hits made by people that came out of the counterculture, came out of the post-counterculture, like soon after, right? Your Starships, because they were Jefferson Airplane, your Fleetwood Macs, your like Bob Seger, early 70s, your Greg Allman from the Allman Brothers, your Pink Floyds, your Grateful Dead, Touch of Grey, right? But they're all doing stuff that's very modern and slick and middle of the road sounding, production wise and stuff. It's all that, really safe for people that are my parents' age, even though my parents didn't really listen to those kind of artists when they were young. Even like Hazy Shade of Winter is a cover by the Bangles getting a hit off of Simon & Garfunkel, right, from the 60s. But then you've got newer bands that are finally finding a way to hit the soft rock, adult contemporary rock, middle of the road. Whitesnake doing Is This Love? You get your, U2 just doing the slickest, most produced, most, probably still honest for them. I'm not, taking a side there, but very commercial Joshua Tree stuff where they break through from being this, they've outgrown the scenes that they sort of originally came from, obviously, but I think they did that pretty fast. Bon Jovi's, just raking in the bucks with Living on a Prayer and Wanted Dead or Alive. Another up-and-comer in Bruce Hornsby doing something really slick, but it still has this down-home feel, It's got, it's a song about mandolins and shit. Saw them open for Huey Lewis and the News the following year, and my folks bought that tape at the concert, I believe. Anyway, this is the environment into which the beast that is Welcome to the Jungle will emerge soon. And I was reviewing the song as performed by Guns N' Roses live on the MTV Awards today. And something struck me that's I've never really given it its credit, never given it its due until today. It is a masterfully orchestrated piece of drama, that fucking song. As an album opener, it is really tough to beat. And it does embody everything great about Guns N' Roses, because you can say about that song what you could say about Guns N' Roses in general. It is, and I'm not going to fall into any bullshit rock journalist, verbiage here. I'm not going to say, it takes no prisoners and asks for no quarter, or it's, I'm not going to use the phrase Sturm und Drang or whatever else that Rolling Stone writers beat to death for 40 years in rock criticism. It comes in setting you up. It builds and builds and builds like some sort of like a Wagner like opera, like it's swelling. Like there's a catchy hook at the beginning with that just echoing part that Slash is playing, and then the melody line while Slash is playing the descending mid. Then the other guitar comes in, presumably Izzy. That's climbing while the other's going down the scale. And the bass notes from Duff are like if someone's just hitting a piano, bong, bong, bong. I mean, it's almost John Williams-y in a way, that sort of tension. And then Axl's voice comes in, Steven's drums build up, dun 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 dun, like the Who used to do, dun 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 dun, ka. All those guitar parts are now gone. Everything they just played, you're pretty much not going to hear for the rest of the song. It's done. That was all a lead-in to the main event. The verse riff. Oh, okay, we're doing this now. We're grooving. And it's not quite heavy metal, but it's not good time Poison rock and roll arena stuff either. And then the sort of persona that Axl creates when he comes in with the Welcome to the Jungle line, and he's like he can be so many things to the listener in this persona. He could be like the crypt keeper, he could be like, welcome to my little lair, blah, blah, blah. You're in LA now. You're in the jungle. He could be a drug dealer. He could be a sleazy promoter, that's going to get your band famous. He could be a pornographer, giving some wannabe actress her first job, getting blammed on over her face by 5 guys in one afternoon. He can be a lot of different characters, that narrator in the song. And he's warning you of what's ahead if you keep going. But he's also sort of implying that what you're going to get is inevitable because you're already here. We know why you're here. You're here for the same reason everybody else came here. It's probably too late. If you had any higher purpose, you wouldn't be here now. To steal a lyric of my own, yes, I've done it. Thank you very much. Why don't I say that at the beginning of every episode? Maybe I will. Damn. But then the band, when you watch them play, they're so unlike their peers at the time because everyone else, it seems to me, I mean, with just looking back in hindsight, like I was, again, a child listening to Huey Lewis and the News, Bruce Hornsby, and like the La Bamba soundtrack when this came out. So I wasn't up on this stuff. We didn't have MTV for many years where I lived. And it seems to me that all the bands that played hard rock that were popular with the girls and such, and were selling lots of records and looking good, your Bon Jovis, your Motley Crues, your Poisons, there's a million others that were doing, some of them were doing cooler shit than others. Some of them were making a lot more money than others. But they all tended to have this like cheeky, like, hey, ooh, when the camera's around them, when they're making a video, like, hey, baby, you're looking in the lens, like, let me check my hair. Ooh. I'm going beyond the typical, like, ooh, they're so dumb because they were glam and they had big hair and they looked like chicks. No. They all acted like they were on top of the world, whether or not they were like as big as Motley Crue or Poison or Bon Jovi or not. They all exuded this sort of like, come look at me, like I want to, get closer, baby, to the camera. And, they're all copping some attitude. And Guns N' Roses looks like they don't give a fuck. And it's easy to say that about lots of performers and lots of bands. Ooh, they didn't give a fuck. But no, they're very focused on what they're individually doing. You don't know if those guys even like each other. Watch them play. Like, they're not like, everyone put your hands up. Yeah. Put your hands up in the air and chant along with us. The only guy that's cool when he does that is Ozzy Osbourne. They're just ripping into it. And it's like they're a walking, talking, breathing, smoking, spitting, fuming warning sign. Like, stay away. But they're passionate. They're not like phoning it in. They're not like, oh, I don't care that I'm even on stage. No, they're very, very like intense. And it's that line between like hardcore punk is confrontational and getting right into the audience and looking them dead in the eyes and getting in fist fights with them. And then glam rock is like preening and primping and like posing on stage and like, oh, we're having so much fun, aren't we, fellows? We're going to have so many pretty ladies tonight sitting on our laps. And then in the middle of it's Guns N' Roses. It's amazing to watch. It's something else. I will say that. It is something else to be reminded of, like, oh yeah, this is especially this particular song. It doesn't want to be your friend. It tells you right from the beginning, like you're walking through the gates of something. You can't go back. You can't go back. Wherever you came from, you're not going to see it again. Now you're in the jungle, baby. You've committed, and there's not a lot of good things ahead of you, but you're in it till the bitter end. And like the only weak spot is just how like shallow, to borrow a Family Guy phrase, how shallow and pedantic that bridge is. Just like whatever it is, it's like D to A or G to D or whatever the fuck it is. Bring. Like musically, I'm not bagging on it. It's like, it's a nice little refresher before you go dun, 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 suck down, dun, dun, dun. But just that when you're high, you never want to come down. Okay, we know. Yeah, okay, Axl. Fine, whatever. You worked pretty hard on the rest of the album. Those 2 lines are, I guess, not that important. Yes, we all don't want to come down when we're high. We get it. When you're eating chocolate chip cookies, you don't want no broccoli. Da-na-na-na-na. How come I never got a job as a famous rock journalist? God damn it. Rolling Stone, call me. I'm just kidding. I know Rolling Stone never existed. It was all a hologram. Also, side note, if you're a big fan of Slash's lead guitar playing, I recommend you check out the live on television, I believe MTV version of Patience that the band did with Don Henley playing drums because Stephen Adler got fucked up and couldn't make it. I just watched it for the first time today, and the band does it all electric with clean tones, so no acoustic guitars, but also no distortion. And Slash solos his balls off, like clean, just flibbity-dibbity for quite a while, and it's great stuff. If you like Slash's solo playing, if you're someone that does not and finds him to be unbearably sloppy, watch it anyway, because you'll hate him even more, I guess. But it's cool watching that, and then the like Tom Petty with Guns N' Roses footage on MTV Awards '89. I want to say it was the night that Vince Neil, sucker punches Izzy, and they do like Heartbreak Hotel and Free Fallin' together. It's really interesting. Like, oh, that's right. There was a short window of time where like the MTV Awards could be kind of wild and spontaneous, like what you would see in an LA club, after hours. Like there's now, with the benefit of YouTube, we now have the footage of, there was a RIP magazine party or a Hit Parader party or something where like Metallica guys were jamming with Skid Row guys and Slash, things like that. It's an amazing, amazing time to be able to go back and look at that. But it's a narrow chunk of the population that either lived through it and knew it happened, but didn't really see the handy cam footage, and now would look for it, would have the wherewithal to go ask their grandkids, what's this YouTube all about? Or the folks that are young and very familiar with how much video is available online, and then do the reading to know, oh my gosh, there was an event where this happened, where guys from Metallica and Guns N' Roses and Skid Row were all partying together and were just as loaded. But yeah, it was my buddy Nick Woodward who pointed out to me just about a month ago. He said, I think people still love saying that grunge killed hair metal, but I really think that Guns N' Roses was the first big catalyst. And I was struck by that, and I thought, you know what? You're right, man. They really, like, if you weren't already transitioning into Dr. Feelgood era Motley Crue status, like if you weren't untouchable and really tough, sort of, outwardly strong as far as your public persona, Guns N' Roses really bit a chunk out of your image and your credibility like a pit bull. They just came along and like, yeah, these guys are all pussies. And I think if it's one thing, if you were, especially when it comes to the women in the fan base, if you were a teen girl when Girls came out, or Theater of Pain, that's one thing. But, if you were a little bit younger and not into boys when that happened, but then when you do get into boys, you turn on MTV in 1989 and you see the Paradise City video or the Sweet Child of Mine video, and you're looking at Axl Rose, like, he's not prancing around with like makeup on and big poofy hair and, big open blouses and stuff. And he's looking pretty dangerous, but also very, very, very much like the kind of guy that, maybe I can reach this man. Maybe if I was hot enough, I could get to him, this troubled young man. And if you're a dude at that right age where you're looking for some sort of positive role model of some kind, it's all well and good if you're 15 when Too Fast for Love comes out, or when The Cat Dragged In comes out, and you're like, oh, these guys get lots of chicks. I want to get lots of chicks. I want to dress like them. But then if you're a little younger, that looks pretty shitty compared to 1989 Guns N' Roses. And if you're not clued in enough to the really heavy stuff, and that's not what's going to get you into rock, here comes Guns N' Roses. Here comes Welcome to the Jungle too, as a really mean-spirited attack on you as a listener that actually is very tuneful. That's the balance. It's not so abrasive that the average, 13-year-old kid, male or female, can't get drawn into it. It's not, it's not Slayer's piece by piece, but it's also not Richard Marx. Unless I paint myself as somebody who is really into it when it came out. No, definitely not. I heard Appetite around 88 or so when some kid let me borrow his copy of it, and sounded like good stuff to me. It was kind of, some of it was pretty unnerving, stuff that they were saying in it. Definitely liked the sounds that the nice lady was making towards the end of the tape on side 2, but it wasn't until Use Your Illusions when I was 14 that I was like, I keyed into the anger and the the pissed off, the specifics of the pissed off lyrics that like, oh, this I relate to. I didn't relate to the previous album or albums lyrically so much, but obviously at 14 I hadn't lived the kind of lives that Izzy and Axl had when they're writing those tunes. I lived nothing that could make me relate to them, but there was something about those. Like they weren't as in control and badass as like a metal band. They were popping off and not in a structured, focused way that metal bands did. Thanks. That was me explaining why Guns N' Roses was good. I'm sure you needed that. I'm sure you needed to know the appeal was, because 50,000 people on YouTube or on magazines and websites haven't done for you already. Shut up. But yeah, I still had to get all those thoughts out there because it was sort of provoked by my friend Nick pointing out the sort of timeline in the death of hair metal or sunset strip metal or glam metal or whatever you want to call it. And how Guns N' Roses really did sound the death knell well before the grunge bands did. I think maybe we could say if we're being fair, we should start saying Guns N' Roses kicked glam metal into the coffin, but so-called grunge bands definitely nailed it shut. And the music industry itself was complicit in that, very much so.
Don't forget to visit our refreshment center during the intermission or any time. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. So will the youngsters. Everything is quality and so good. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see, delightful snacks to nibble, a gay, pleasant evening for all. Oh, a word of caution. Don't drive over 10 miles an hour in the theater area for your safety's sake. And Mom or Pop, go with the kids when they leave the car. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
Now, I don't want to slouch on the Deadpool facts and figures here. I want to go to a very fun resource that I have kind of peeked at a few times for other films, but never really used to great extent here on A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll. That is tvtropes.org. And boy, oh boy, if you want certain elements of entertainment ruined for you, go to tvtropes.com and look up some of your favorite franchises, perhaps. This is an entry for the Deadpool. It says, directed by Buddy Van Horn and released in 1988, The Deadpool is the last film preceded by Sudden Impact in the Dirty Harry pentalogy, starring Clint Eastwood as Harry Callahan for the last time. Detective Harry Callahan is tasked to solve a string of murders related to a game based on a list of celebrities that are predicted to die next, the Deadpool. The case makes him a small celebrity, too, and he becomes a target as well. To make matters worse, Harry is also hounded by the mob. Liam Neeson and Jim Carrey, both on the cusp of becoming big stars, appear in supporting roles. Has no relation whatsoever to Deadpool, the comic book character, except for it most certainly influenced Rob Liefeld's choice of name. Anyway, this film has the examples of, and there is a big old list of tropes. So here we go. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Actor illusion. Harry performs a gun twirl like the man with no name, which was his character in, the Sergio Leone Dollars trilogy. Next trope. All Asians know martial arts. Quan takes down one of the gunmen in Chinatown with a flurry of punches, followed up with an expressive spinning heel kick. Badass boast. Fuck with me, buddy. I'll kick your ass so hard you'll have to unbutton your collar to shit. Batman cold open. The film opens with mob hitmen out to kill Harry. I assume that's a reference to the TV show where there'd be no, I guess not necessarily. It says named after the common scenario found in the Adventures of the Dark Knight Detective. This is a short 2 to 3 page cold open sequence that opens a superhero comic depicting the vigilante engaging in some crime fighting on bit part bad guys, typically a bank robbery or mugging, usually unrelated to the plot at large, meant to illustrate the crime fighting abilities of our hero. Okay. Oh, wait. Often giving him the chance to brood about whatever is or will be bothering him for the extent of the issue. It can also help offset the Worf effect by showing the hero is competent before having him beaten by the serious threat later in the story. Oh boy, what's the Worf effect? Here we go, folks. Here's how it happens. Want a quick way to show how dangerous one of your unknown characters is? Simple. Make them do well or win in a fight with a character the audience already knows is tough. This establishes them as willing to fight and marks them as sufficiently dangerous. Okay, that's the Worf effect. Oh, man. All right, so back to next one is BFG. Harry's Magnum. I guess BFG stands for big fucking gun. Harry's Magnum, obviously exaggerated after the big bad takes Harry's gun from him. Harry grabs a harpoon gun to finish him off. Oh, okay. Big bad, Harlan Rook, the Deadpool killer. Bond one-liner. After killing Rook by impaling him with the harpoon gun, Harry says to Captain Donnelly, he's hanging out back there. Oh, yeah, that's a bad one. Bottomless magazines, averted at the end of the film when the big bad takes Harry's revolver. Harry knows how many rounds are left and when the villain fired off his last round. Harry says, you're out of bullets, and you know what that means. You're shit out of luck before impaling him through the wall with a harpoon gun. Callback. Early in the movie, Harry walks past a series of memorial plaques to police officers of San Francisco killed in the line of duty. These are the same plaques featured in the opening of Dirty Harry. The cameo. Guns N' Roses make uncredited cameo appearances at the funeral of Johnny Squares. They also appeared during a filming of a nightmare scene at the docks, where Slash fires a harpoon gun through a window and is berated by Swan. Both Guns N' Roses and Slash have hyperlinks. I'm going to check those out. Chekhov's gun, the enormous harpoon gun from the film shoot. Right, Slash fires off the harpoon gun early on, and later on Harry uses it. Because Chekhov's gun is if you show something early on in the story, then someone else needs to use it later in the story. That's sort of a basic, cheap way of explaining it without me having to click on it and read it. Continuity nod. One of the collected headlines in Samantha's notebook about Harry reads, Scorpio Killer captured. Because that was, Scorpio Killer, I think, was from the first Dirty Harry film. Oh my God. I didn't know this was a TV trope. But yeah, it makes sense. Deadly remote control toy. Rook kills talk show host Nolan Kennard, another person on the Deadpool list, using a radio-controlled car filled with C4 explosive under the victim's vehicle. Dirty Harry Callahan finds a toy car wheel at the crime scene and later sees another toy car following him and Quan. Realizing the threat, they flee through the city pursued by the toy car and Rook himself controlling it from his car. Distracted by the sexy while spotting Quan weightlifting, Harry becomes distracted by a woman working out. Hilarity ensues as Quan gets stuck under the barbell. Okay, I said I would do some investigating into Steven's story, and I think I found a good spot in his book to pull from. It just so happens to involve the Deadpool with Clint Eastwood. Before that is a cool Tommy Lee story, so I will start there. And if you've never read Stephen's book, it is sort of chopped up. It's in a lot of pieces. Like there's a new. It's not just like here's the title of a chapter and then you read through the chapter. It's like every page and a half there's a new heading and a new little story, which I think is a nice approach for someone who is publishing a book so far after other people have published their history of being Guns N' Roses or journalists writing about the history of Guns N' Roses. I think this is smart. It's not the only time I've seen it. It's there was a good example of it recently that I used for some research on something on another episode, and I can't remember what it was right now, but it's a smart idea. It's, tell things from your perspective, tell the stories that haven't been told yet, or your version of the stories that have been told. Don't be trying to, fill in all the blanks for everybody. This is your autobiography. So good for him. Stephen's story is a sad one, and it just seems like a real fun-loving guy that wanted to have a good time all the time and wasn't able to stop himself from his own undoing. I listened to him being interviewed by Bill Burr years ago on Bill Burr's podcast when I could listen to that back in the day, when I guess I just didn't have enough people yelling at me on a weekly basis for some reason. I don't know how I could stand it anymore. But also it was the, whatever it was like the early 2010s, maybe. It was a different time for podcasting. But the point was, he interviewed one of his heroes, Steven Adler. I think Bill Burr always made a pretty good point that as great as Matt Sorum was, he didn't have the swing that Steven did. And he was very precise, and Steven was just kind of more fun. And it was a real sad thing. Steven was there with his mom, and Steven couldn't speak very well, and it's just not the way you want to remember somebody, especially after he'd been in the Guns N' Roses Behind the Music, where he just, it's clipped out of a larger interview clearly, and they just kind of put in the stuff about how his friends left him and they didn't help him and stuff, and you don't really get a feeling for what he was saying before that or after that. You go and you just kind of walk away going, well, that's your fault, Steven. They don't have any obligation to make you change your life, and they tried to get you to change your life. Anyways, let's go to his words in his story. The part before this, he talks about a woman named Athena, who is a good friend of his who he feels like he could have married, but they were such good friends they were, not really going to be romantically dedicated to each other. They had a non-commitment sort of relationship. She was... he didn't think of her as a wife, he says, but a level-headed go-to girl who could have been in my corner with some good counsel from time to time. I think that Athena could have been that girl, but I was way too young and immature to even think about that at the time. Why have a level head when you could just have head? I have to admit, there's one or two women in my life that I feel like I could marry, not because of romantic reasons, but they would always be level-headed or caring enough to make sure my life was better with them in it, and I respect them enough that I would want to make their lives better for having me in it, as much as live up to that promise and that example pretty well. But I don't think the romantic interests, unfortunately. It's a shame. For me, not for them. They're probably going to be fine. Anyhow, after this, it says that the header is Heather Lockjaw. And he says, around this time, I had also been hanging with Athena's brother, Tommy Lee. So, okay, one of the strongest female presences in his life is also Tommy Lee's sister. He called me one day and said, dude, why don't you come over? We'll go dirt biking. Fuck yeah, can I bring my little brother? Tommy said, sure. I thought Jamie's going to love this. He was just a kid, 12 or 13 at the time, and a huge Motley fan. We got in my Mercedes and cruised over to Tommy's house, which was in an upscale gated community off Ventura Boulevard, way up in Woodland Hills. Heather and Tommy, I don't think he's identified her yet.
Heather Locklear is who he's referring to. If you didn't grow up in the 1980s and see the stories about them on Entertainment Tonight with John Tesh and what's her name? Heather and Tommy were very much an item in those days, unless he's brought up Heather Locklear earlier in the book, for all I know. When we arrived, Tommy said she was sick. She had the flu or something. Eventually, she came down, and I introduced her to Jamie. It was clear that she was not feeling well, which is probably why she seemed a little bitchy. But I always smiled and treated her with respect. She was a gorgeous girl, but she was a TV star, kind of stuck up. She was always worried about Tommy on the road, jealous about girls. Personally, I knew she had every reason to be concerned. Tommy had a couple of Hondas. We took the bikes behind his house. There was a massive dirt mound just a short way back, perfect for riding. That day, I showed Jamie how to work the brakes, the accelerator, and the clutch, and how to change the gears. It felt good being the big brother, showing him how to drive a motorcycle. He did great, and it was a fantastic time. At the end of the day, we thanked Tommy and Heather for their hospitality and vowed to do it again sometime. Tommy just wanted to frolic and play all the time. He was the same fun-loving person I was, two drummers who just wanted to hang away the day. Heather was definitely chaining him down, but guys like Tommy and me will put up with a lot, and then look out. And that's really that for this story, I guess, because he starts talking about Decline of Western Civilization Part 2 in the next paragraph without a new header. So that weekend, a movie chronicling heavy metal's increasing popularity, particularly in L.A., opened. It was called Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, The Metal Years. As far as I was concerned, the best part about the film was that we weren't in it. Good man, Stephen. Izzy played guitar and Axel did backing vocals, however, on the soundtrack's updated version of Under My Wheels with Alice Cooper. I thought that kind of rocked. Most of the bands featured in Decline were struggling to make it, but were overly confident about their shot at success. In the end, few of them ever truly made it. One scene in particular, featuring a shit-faced Chris Holmes, Wasp's guitarist, is depressing as hell. Obviously, a lot of you listening to this already know what he's going to refer to. He's sitting in his mother, cursing up a storm, talking about dying, complaining about being a rock star. His mom was just sitting there smiling. I thought the whole segment was a real downer. There was, however, some comic relief in there for me, particularly the scene with Paul Stanley lying in bed with a number of scantily clad young females. The scene looked so artificial. I couldn't help but think that after the shot, somebody yelled, "Cut!" and paychecks were handed out and everyone just went home. That's a good point. I think Nikki Sixx made on an old sort of chat show that used to exist on VH1 years ago. It was called like The Question, or it was called Top 5 or some fucking thing. I forget what it was called. There'd be like 5 main questions asked to a panel of rock stars, and they would debate, and they would sort of like all vote on what the best answer was. And this one particular episode had Lars Ulrich from Metallica, Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue, probably Sebastian Bach, and maybe another person or one or two people from other bands, I forget. And they were like, the question was, what is the number one, or what is the top sex, drugs, and rock and roll band, of all time? And it was like, they talk about Kiss, they talk about Led Zeppelin, they talk about, Motley, Guns N' Roses. And Guns N' Roses won. Maybe Slash was in on the conversation too, because I remember I think somebody from Guns N' Roses was in the panel. Like it might have been Duff or who knows. If you know what I'm talking about, call in. And I think it was Nikki that made the point when it came to sex and the band Kiss, they always seemed phony. Like whenever you saw them, he's like, when you saw Motley or Guns N' Roses with girls in photos and video and stuff, it looked real. Like it looked messy. They looked like real women that had, things looked a bit rough and sloppy in those photos. I'm using my words, not Nikki's. But one thing I remember him saying specifically was, with Kiss, it always looked posed. It always looked like it was always a professional photo shoot, and you didn't get the feeling that they were really banging all those girls. Even though, in real life, Kiss was banging tons of girls on the road, in hotels and stuff. He just didn't buy how posed it was when it came to everything, just everyone's hair just right and makeup and the positions of everything and the framing of the photograph. Anyhow,
the next part of this chunk says, on March 31st, 1988, we did another acoustic performance with me playing drums on a show that was called Fox Late Night, a variety hour. That's the end of the sentence. All right. It featured a black host, so 1 in a Million was out of the lineup. Instead, we did a mid-tempo version of You're Crazy and also Used to Love Her. When the host introduced the second song, he blew the surprise punchline of our tune by announcing, coming up, Guns N' Roses perform I Used to Love Her, but I had to kill her? There's a question mark, exclamation mark. The first time I ever heard the lyrics to that song was back at Hell House. Axl and Duff came up with them. I thought it was so damn funny. The reason I remember that performance so well is because we played Crazy the way it was always meant to be played. Slower, sleazy, more bluesy, with more feeling, and not the frantic sped-up version on Appetite. Even though Axl had to censor himself for TV and leave out all the fuckins, he did a masterful job. And it's definitely my favorite rendition of Crazy. Check it out on YouTube. http:// // I don't remember anymore. www. Yeah, I'm reading this out. .youtube.com/watch ?V =$ capital RUQ capital UQ capital NUH number 2 and capital Q tic-tac-toe sign. The hashtag. What is it called? What is the thing? Pound sign. And then the period, but the period's not in the URL. I'm sorry that I'm laughing that Steven and his editor both don't know well enough to just say, check it out on YouTube. You'll probably find it under the title, Guns N' Roses, You're Crazy Acoustic 1989, or something to that effect on the box. Because no one can, I mean, I guess the Kindle edition of this, yeah, you could probably click on it and it'll take you straight. If that YouTube video is still up, if it hasn't been taken down by somebody's actions and then re-uploaded on a different URL. Anyhow, the next heading is Party On. Of course, life is a nonstop party. Axl would have Del and Wes out with him. Duff and Slash were a little less distant toward me since my hand had healed. Because we know a bit about that story, I think, from the previous episode. But honestly, because that was the infamous, he gets in a fight with a porch light lamp outside of a bar. Let's see. Who needed the fucking drama? I didn't, so I decided to hang with Tom Mayhew, my newly appointed tech. If you know, tech is your person who takes care of all of your musical instruments on the road, sets them up for you, so you just walk up to sound check, start playing, in this case, your drums. And teching for drums is a very involved process it's important to have a professional to have everything set up just the way you like it. And there's a million little moving parts in your drum set that are a pain in the butt. Unlike guitars, where you just open them out of the case and then plug them in and tune them, and then check the settings on the neck and the bridge, and everything's playing the way it's supposed to, and it's all in tune. Anyway, he had already been on many tours, particularly with Dawkins, serving as Mick Brown's tech. I was getting massive amounts of coke, but I found that I would burn out on it from time to time. So on many occasions, I'd give what I had left to Doug and just be like, do whatever you want with it, but just get it away from me. Time had arrived for us to shoot our second video, Sweet Child of Mine. It was filmed at the Huntington Ballroom in Huntington Beach. All the guys got their girlfriends to be in it with us. Axl had been dating Erin Everly for a few years. She was the daughter of Don Everly of the Everly Brothers. She was just the sweetest girl, and I thought for sure that she wouldn't be able to stand Axl for long. They were always arguing about this or that, and at times it would get really intense. When he first brought her around, she was so cool, and I honestly thought, I hope Axl doesn't screw this up. Duff was dating and became engaged to a girl named Mandy, who performed in an all-girl LA band called the Lame Flames. Check them out, by the way. Cool stuff and very nice to look at if that's the kind of thing you are into, which I am, and it just makes me wish I had been born a few years earlier. I digress. As if that's what's preventing me from dating someone in the Lame Flames. Let's see. The Slash had his current girl there, and I brought Cheryl in. That's Cheryl in, not Cheryl Lynn. A friend of mine worked with the LA Punk Veterans TSOL, with whom we had played many shows, and asked me if I would wear the shirt in the video. Why not? I happily obliged. Damn it, TSOL is one of those bands I need to listen to more of. I feel really crappy about that. Like DRI and GBH, other bands with initialisms that have always have had a good T-shirt presence in the universe. Let's see. A few weeks after the Sweet Child video was shot, our record was certified platinum. It was an unbelievable achievement for the band and our whole team. Our popularity was soaring to the point that we were being referred to as a supergroup in the rock rags. We truly were the rock stars we dreamed of becoming, and it was finally starting to sink in. But it was soon plain to see that the bigger we got, the colder we became. Next, it says, Clint, my first OD. Right after the Sweet Child video became a sensation on MTV, the band's growing popularity came to the attention of screen legend Clint Eastwood. Someone must have suggested bringing us into his new film project, The Deadpool. Around the same time, I was asking Dougie, dude, can you get us in a movie or a TV show, a fucking cartoon, anything? So it was a pretty cool coincidence how it all worked out. I believe elsewhere I've explained the connection. It was Clint's son, his teenage son, loved Guns N' Roses. And that was how it got recommended, unfortunately. And the oh my gosh, the whole cycle of it is so strange and almost like a Greek tragedy. It's like well-meaning young man tries to get his dad to boost his favorite band in the world, and then dad, who's like a jazz piano player, hates the band, brings them into his movie begrudgingly. Or, through their management, I'm sure Clint Eastwood didn't like, get me Guns N' Roses, goddammit, or I quit. Nothing like that, but whatever. And then, films himself shooting the gun that was the basis for the Guns N' Roses logo at a boombox that plays the Guns N' Roses song for the third time in the film, at least. And then Guns N' Roses hates Clint Eastwood and, Axl Rose at least hates Clint Eastwood and his fucking teenage son as a result of the whole thing. Oh, God. Anyway, Steven says, Axl would later proclaim the movie to be a piece of shit, encouraging fans not to see it. It featured a would-be Axl-type rock star, Johnny Squares, played by a then-unknown Jim Carrey, lip-syncing to Welcome to the Jungle. In the film's plot, he is murdered in what would be made to look like an overdose to the participants in a pool for betting on when celebrities could benefit from the bets they had placed in their morbid game. We were scheduled for 2 days of filming. The first was at Forest Lawn Cemetery in San Francisco, where we were cast as rock and roll friends of the deceased Johnny Squares. We all knew this would be a great visual exposure. We were going to be in a movie. It was exciting, and even Axl showed up on time. During the first day of filming, I hooked up with this stripper chick who was an extra on the set. She was a local, so we went back to her place. We smoked a little weed, and she made us tea. I noticed that she had slipped a brown powder substance into my cup. I assumed it was some kind of spice or something. The last thing I remember, she had my head between her legs and was forcing my face against her groin. Now I'll show you how to eat pussy, she purred. She was in control, and I was floating away on some silken cloud without a care in the world. I began to chuckle at her remark as those clouds enveloped me, and then nothing. I passed out while she was mounting me. What a time for my first heroin overdose. I woke up in a hospital room the day we were supposed to be filming our second scene for the film. I had no idea how long I had been out. In fact, I had no idea where I was or what had happened. But as my vision cleared, it was apparent someone was keeping vigil over me. Someone was at my bedside, patiently waiting for me to come out of it, though no one knew if or when that would be. I blinked. I blinked again. It was Axl. Axl got up and was now standing over me. He smiled. He looked genuinely relieved. He said, "Man, that was close, Stevie." He was the only one there. Later, a nurse told me he had sat by my bed the whole time. The other guys went ahead to do the movie, but Axl stayed at the hospital. What Axl did was so noble, so selfless, and surprising that I cried, and they were tears of joy. He kind of shifted uneasily when he saw the waterworks, but that was just too bad. I felt nothing but unbridled love for him in that moment, and I didn't care if he saw it. There he was, blowing off a chance to be in a scene for a major movie release, to stand by me, his own personal vigil, just Axl, goddamn Axl. As soon as I thought I had him pegged, he went and did one of the most touching, meaningful things anyone's ever done for me. That was so cool. Thanks, Axl. Here's the thing about Axl. He demands emotion. Love me, hate me, but don't you dare fucking ignore me. He will not tolerate a vacuum. Sometimes I think that's why he would keep our fans waiting for 3 hours before going on. He demanded an emotionally charged atmosphere at all times. I know a guy like that.
Because he's a big lying sack of shit. Hi, John. Fuck you.
He wanted a life spent on the frantic, jagged edge, and that's why he could deliver that unique urgency in his lyrics. He lived it. Having Axl there really had a powerful effect on me. I was back on my feet in no time. The nurse called it the power of youth. More like the power of stupidity. Anyone with just an ounce of sense would have known to wait for a clean bill of health from the doctor, but not me, as soon as I could get out of bed without falling over face first. And that happened at least a dozen times. I was leaving. I ripped out the tubes from my arms and just stumbled out. And that's all Steven has to say about the Deadpool. From here, it goes into the Iron Maiden tour. And I just realized, I think the person I was thinking about that made a similar styled autobiography that I recommend is Ace Frehley's No Regrets, which I haven't finished reading, but I cherry-picked some parts for the last Kiss episode that I've done out of, I think, 3 or 4 so far. Yeah, I did 4 total. Most of them are sort of shorter episodes based around a TV show kind of thing. But I also, if you haven't heard it, did the Phantom of the Park. So go check those out if you like Kiss. And the Ace Frehley book is very much like Steven's book in structure. You can just respond well after the fact to what other people have already said and tell your bits of the story that you know your fans would particularly like. Let's talk about cooking. And let's do it by taking a peek into Duff McKagan's first book. I believe it's his first book. It's So Easy and Other Lies. And there's a chunk here where he provides some great recipes that come from his past that he, maybe innovated based on his cooking jobs he had in LA, and one of them is a great little cheater for folks that don't even necessarily think they can cook, or folks that do think they can cook but need to be reminded of their roots, I would say. So he'd been working at Black Angus and down in some part of Hollywood. And it was time to lay people off after Thanksgiving, and he was the newest person there, so he had the least seniority, and he got laid off. He got let go. And he said, after I lost my job at the Black Angus, by the way, if you don't hear the words Black Angus in your head the way I do, I highly recommend, maybe if you're not averse to some naughty language in your stand-up comedy, and why would you if you're a fan of Guns N' Roses, go look up Patton Oswalt's Black Angus bit. The Gauntlet of Angry Food bit from his first full-length record album. That I won't spoil it. Anyways, that Black Angus. Maybe you just hear that because you grew up like I did in the 80s and you remember those commercials. He says, food joined the list of things that were hard to fit into the budget. I was left with the task of figuring out a cheap way to cook food and subsist with only a hot plate, a single pan, and a small refrigerator. So what he's talking about here is an electrical implement that is not a stove with a pan on it. It's a little, I know a lot of you already know what I'm talking about, but just for the benefit of those that don't know, it is like a module with a heat element inside of it, and some sort of hard covering, hopefully of a porcelain or metal or glass construct, so that you can just take this portable stove with you wherever you go, and it's just a staple of living for people who don't have a proper apartment or a proper home or anywhere to live that has a kitchen. People that rent a bedroom. This is why I'm explaining this, not because no one knows what a hot plate is, but you got to understand. This is for people that are renting a place so small or living communally with a lot of other people that they can't guarantee having access to a cooking surface in the traditional sense. And then a small refrigerator that he refers to, that's probably, I don't know, about 2.5 feet high, maybe 3 feet high, 2 feet wide. The kind of things folks put beverages in their home office or their den or their man cave, when that was a thing. Yeah, I know it's not 2004 and people don't generally talk about man caves anymore, but come on, look at the podcasts on the YouTubes of all the white guys in their 20s and 30s talking about alpha versus beta dynamics and stuff. They're pulling energy beverages out of those tiny little coolers. That's what he's talking about. Not a refrigerator that a family would have in a proper home. That's what I'm saying. I mean, if the family's doing okay. In America, in the 80s, a lot of folks could make good use of a small refrigerator, whatever their situation is. So let's see. He says, that's when I discovered the wonders of top ramen. After some experimentation, and this is what makes him a great man, most people never get to the experimentation phase. They just open a package and they throw the water on and they eat it and then they get all the sodium and then they go on about their day or they pass out after, whatever drugs they've taken that makes you crave that much sodium and carbohydrates. It says, I hit upon the perfect modifications to provide a meal, filling meal for about $1 a serving. He calls it the Hollywood Bowl, parentheses, noodle in the middle. Hollywood Noodle Bowl. Number 1, bring a pot of water to hard boil. Hard boil is a rolling, more intense than a rolling boil. Bubbles are coming up really fast, not just slowly, and it's not just like disrupting. These are my words, not his. Not just disrupting the surface of the water. It's like the air can't wait to get up out of the bottom of the pot, kind of a thing. Then, number 2, add ramen noodles and a package of frozen mixed vegetables and cook for 3 minutes. And that's why you have to have the water so hot. These are my words again. Because as soon as you throw freezing cold matter into a boiling pot of water, it cools down really fast. And you're going to lose a lot of time and a lot of momentum with the cooking. And also, if you slowly cook out these vegetables as opposed to quickly in a hot flash, they're more likely to get mushy and break open and just sort of spill their contents out into the water. You want them, you want them to kind of pop a little bit when you're eating them. You want them to hold that goodness inside, not be all mushy. Now, step 3, according to Duff, crack a raw egg into the boiling soup. Let cook for an additional 30 seconds. Turn off hot plate. Stir in powdered flavor packet from the ramen noodles. There you go. Try it out. Also, I recommend adding leftover meat from some dish that you cooked a few days before. Maybe some, some chicken, maybe some beef, maybe some steak. The ends that were a little overcooked, perhaps. Might be a good way to rejuvenate it and make people happy. Or if you got a little bit of shrimp, that works too. Just saying. Another discovery. For occasional break from ramen, the low-rent hotel on my block offered a happy hour buffet. If you bought a beer, you could gorge yourself on pig in the blankets, fried mozzarella sticks, and French fries. All things, this is your narrator speaking, that are very cheap to produce and full of fat and starch that would keep people full unless you're a member of Guns N' Roses. It's the only meal you're going to have all day. But pig in a blanket is if you don't know, is a hot dog or some sort of pork product in a tube-based casing, skin casing, that is wrapped in usually some kind of a croissant type thing. Also, a lot of these things could be purchased at Costco for very cheap by restaurants at the time, and still to this day. Just ask my dad after he got divorced. If it wasn't something you could put in the microwave for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, we weren't eating it during that era. This very same era almost that Duff's talking about. He says, in the front of the hotel was a payphone. One evening, walking out with my belly filled with its meal of the day, I saw a guy doing business on the phone. A guy dressed like Johnny Thunders. You people know where this is going if you know who I am and what I like to talk about on this podcast. Taking a second glance, I recognized the guy. It was everyone on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Izzy Stradlin. We had met a few weeks prior when we both turned up at the same girl's place on the same night. Could have been awkward, but we both shrugged it off and started talking about music. Izzy was into Thunders, Hanoi Rocks, Fear, the rough street acts I also preferred to the technical polish of metal. I don't know if there's a better one-sentence summary of what made Guns N' Roses so different in this tiny little window of time. Fear, Hanoi Rocks, Johnny Thunders. I mean, it's not enough to talk about the Sex Pistols and Motorhead in conjunction with Aerosmith, which is what folks, rightfully do when they talk about Guns N' Roses influences. It's an easy, 1, 2, 3, ba 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 ba, snap, snap, snap. If you think about these bands, think about the American swagger and the long hair and the scarves of Aerosmith, and then think about the snottiness of the Sex Pistols and rebellion for its own sake and fuck you. And then think about Motorhead for the extra speed and aggression and sort of that level of heavy metal influence too, that is kind of stylistically in between the straight up punk and the and the American hard rock songwriting. But then most people will get that if they know who those bands are. But then go deeper. Talk about the fact that guys like Duff, guys like Izzy, it wasn't that they couldn't relate because of the other bands that they liked. They were a little more mainstream. Specifically, Fear, Hanoi Rocks, Johnny Thunders. All incredibly different bands and artists, but very influential to bands of the Guns N' Roses era in Southern California. You can't deny it. In a way that a lot of other bands wouldn't have. I know it sounds like a paradox or a contradiction of what I'm saying. The guy that used to be in the Heartbreakers, the best hair metal band that influenced a lot of other hair metal bands, and then a very confrontational, tongue-in-cheek, hardcore punk band that wrote, a few hooks people could still remember after they left the show. Anyway, he says that Izzy reminded me of some of the cooler figures I had known back home. I ended up giving him a ride to some other girl's house later that night. So they met at one girl's house that they're in sort of competition for, and then he took him to someone else's to maybe someone could score there. In either meaning of the word score. We exchanged phone numbers, and that was it. Now here he was on my block. It turned out Izzy had just moved in across the street. I knew the alley behind Izzy's place was really bad, full of hookers and drug dealers. Shit went down there all the time. What I didn't realize was that Izzy's place was in the back of the building and that he sold heroin out his back window. Izzy was pretty much strung out the whole time, but he wasn't sloppy, not nodding out. He was a maintenance guy. Those are in quotes, not maintenance guy as in the guy that comes into your, building to fix the plumbing. Meaning he did just enough heroin to stave off withdrawal. As we got to know each other, for some reason, I was able to look past his smack habit. In part, it was because he handled himself well. In part, it was because we bonded over a mutual love of Johnny Thunders. Alone in L.A., musical touchstones, it seemed, could trump something that months before in a different setting would likely have snuffed out any budding friendship. In part, it had to do with his drive and determination. Generally, I looked at heroin users as a rung below. I was bitter about dope because of the friendships and relationships it had cost me back in Seattle. I saw what the drug did to people and saw that nobody ever got off it. But for some reason, I wasn't bitter toward Izzy. He was different somehow. During those early months, I sometimes had to pawn things to make rent while waiting to get paid. One day, I heard a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, I found 2 cops. "Do you own a black BC Rich Seagull guitar?" They read out the serial number. I answered in the affirmative. I had gotten it back in Seattle from Kurt Bloch of the Fastbacks. That's a name. That's a name in Seattle rock history right there. Woof. I traded him for it in exchange for another guitar. "And you pawned it?" They said the name of the shop I regularly used. Yes, I had. They then informed me this guitar had been stolen from a music store 5 years earlier. Pawn shops have to report every item they take in, and my guitar, again the one I got in Seattle, had raised a red flag. They began to question me as if I had been the initial burglar. Must have been easy to read from my reaction that I was just the guy left holding the bag. They didn't arrest me, but they took the BC Rich. Great. I just recovered a piece of stolen gear and transported it to Los Angeles for them. I felt pretty down that day. I already had no money. Now, I also had no guitar.
I mean business. I'm putting it down there. I ain't hearing no amens, but I ain't wanting any. No. Hellfire. Hellfire. All right.
It's going to be it for today, friends. More Guns N' Roses coming very, very soon. I would urge you to check out the links in the description for maybe some of the sources of the research I did, as well as opportunities to support the show without paying anything or with, paying things. Either way you want. I would also say to never, ever forget you absolutely deserve to be loved and have a great time while you are on this earth. You deserve to be able to pursue things that make you happy. Remember that rock and roll is the best. So are you.
Please remember to replace the speaker on the post when you leave the theater.